Most people are going to be victims of the biggest wealth transfer in all of history because they don't understand the true purpose of Bitcoin. They're very likely going to ignore Bitcoin until it reaches millions of dollars. And this video is a result of my 3.5-year journey of learning and thinking about Bitcoin pretty much full time. I ignored Bitcoin from 2010 all the way to 2020 when a coworker told me about it. And after I started looking, I realized that I didn't even understand the purpose of money to begin with, even though I have a finance background. More than 80% of the people out there, I'd say it's closer to 90, 95%, will argue that Bitcoin is worthless. It has no utility. It doesn't do anything. But almost every single one of them have done zero research. They don't understand that Bitcoin's true purpose is to be sound money. Sound money is money that can be used to transfer value, store value, and account for value over the long term. A commodity has to have certain characteristics to work as sound money. And if these characteristics don't exist, it fails as money. This is a chart that I saw that shows you all of the characteristics that money should have. And it compares Bitcoin, gold, and fiat currencies like the US dollar. It shows you which ones are great for each characteristic and which ones are terrible. If you look at this chart, if you just look at it, look at each separate column, you can see that fiat currencies are pretty much the worst out of all three because fiat currencies can't be used as money. They can't be used as a savings tool. They're terrible to use as a unit of account because if you want to save value for the future, for the long term, they don't work at all. The value of your dollars are always going to decrease. They're always going to decrease over time. Gold worked pretty well as a form of money. The only issue with gold is that it doesn't work in a digital economy. Gold doesn't work as money when you have to transfer it over the internet. For example, if you wanted to pay somebody across the country, you can't pay them with gold because you can't send gold over the internet. Bitcoin seems like it does everything very well other than having an established history, and we don't know if it's as durable as we think it is. So Bitcoin, maybe it can be hacked, maybe there's some kind of vulnerability. Nothing right now that's come out, but Bitcoin hasn't been hacked yet, but who knows? Maybe that's something that could happen in the future. Bitcoin also doesn't have an established history, and that's fine. If the only thing that holds Bitcoin back from gold is not having an established history, that's pretty much irrelevant because in every other way, Bitcoin is better than gold and fiat currencies. Gold and fiat currencies have their own characteristics. They have their own reasons for being used. Bitcoin combines all of the positives of gold and fiat, and it gives you one uniform asset that you can use as money. Every fiat currency has failed in the past, and dollars are just another example of this. Fiat currencies are not scarce, and this stops a lot of people from wanting to store value in them because you know for a fact that if you save in fiat currencies, your wealth will slowly disappear, and you have no say in it. Governments can print as much money as they want to. This can lead to inflation. I'll link a video just explaining that somewhere here. But US dollars don't work as a store of value because they just keep decreasing in purchasing power over time. And there's nothing that you can do about it. If you hold dollars, your dollars will decrease in value all the time. Over time, we also know that your cost of living will continue to go up forever because the supply of dollars is increasing and they're becoming less scarce. People still want them, but each dollar buys fewer things every single year because the raw materials that go into production are getting more expensive, meaning that whatever the final product is going to be much more expensive. More dollars are chasing the same number of goods over time, and we saw this tick up during the lockdowns. You can see at the bottom right here, this chart where it shows you the $100 in 1930 adjusted for inflation. Over time, it just accelerates. It keeps accelerating. After the US dollar was taken off the gold standard, you can see the inflation rate fluctuated from 1971 all the way till 2019. In 2019 or 2020, we had the pandemic, the lockdowns. The US government borrowed trillions of dollars, and they basically flooded the market with that money. The Federal Reserve printed something like 40% of the supply of the total dollars. So what that means is that every dollar in existence lost value. It decreased in value. When you have a currency that can be pretty much stolen from by another entity, why would you want to continue to store value in it? One of the reasons why people even use dollars is that they expect these dollars to be they expect these dollars to retain some of their value or most of their value tomorrow, the next day, the day after. During the pandemic, the US government demonstrated that this is not true anymore. People were being paid to not be productive. Shops were closed down. People got thousands of dollars just to sit at home and do nothing. And what they were doing is they were printing this money. The US government was borrowing this money. The Federal Reserve was printing this money. As all this money was adding to the economy. It was being added to the economy, and it decreased the value of any previously issued dollar. So if you saved in dollars before the pandemic, before the lockdowns, you would have lost a significant amount of your net worth during the lockdowns because of this hike in inflation, this massive increase in inflation. At one point, the US government was saying that CPI was at 9%. And the reality is that it was much higher than that. It was probably significantly higher than that because the amount of money being added to the economy, it almost doubled within a few years, right? And that's not gonna stop. That's gonna continue over time because as the value of the dollar that's being printed decreases, governments need to print even more to have the same impact. So because of events like this, because of this kind of control, anyone who's financially literate gets rid of their dollars and they buy assets like stocks, bonds, real estate, all these things for long-term savings because dollars are guaranteed to decrease in value while all these other assets either pay interest, they pay some kind of cash flow, or they appreciate in value over time. Anyone who's not financially literate blames they blame all of the issues on capitalism or some other issue like maybe climate change, something that they think is making their life worse. But in reality, it's the fact that your money is being printed out of thin air. The money that you use, the time that you're spending to earn this money is being exchanged for something that can be created out of thin air. It can be created with the press of a button. So I'm not saying that climate change is fake, but I mean, I haven't done enough research on it, so I can't say, but there's a bigger problem right in front of you. And that problem is that your government is stealing your money and printing more constantly, devaluing what you save, devaluing your earnings, and taking that value for themselves. And they're using it to do whatever they want. So the financially literate buy all these assets to essentially fulfill the store of value function of money because the US dollar doesn't work as money. Bitcoin is sound money. Bitcoin is the discovery of digital scarcity, and it works perfectly as money because it has all the characteristics as that something needs to have to work as money. Like I said, I showed you from the chart. It can be used as a store of value because it can't be created out of thin air. If the US government wants to stimulate its economy, it can't produce more Bitcoin. It has to actually fund investments in research and development. It has to create more businesses. It has to incentivize people, entrepreneurs, to work harder and create more value. Bitcoin right now may not be the best medium of exchange or unit of account, but that's only because most of the world uses dollars to account for value. So as the network for a currency grows, the value of creating something on that currency increases. So as Bitcoin becomes more widely adopted, it means that more and more people are going to be using Bitcoin as a store of value, meaning that for entrepreneurs, there's going to be more customers, more people that they can target with products that they create. So for example, if somebody creates another layer 2, like Visa, MasterCard, if somebody creates another version of that or a better version of that, they have more and more clients coming onto Bitcoin over time, and they can use this product to impact more lives and they can become wealthier. This is how entrepreneurs are incentivized. On the US dollar standard, there's no way to do that. There's no way to basically disrupt the financial system because the financial system it seems almost to be protected. But Bitcoin is money that anyone can send and receive over the internet. And if you think about how important this is, it really puts things into perspective. You can send value to anyone across the world without banks, without relying on banks. This changes everything. This changes everything about e-commerce. We no longer need banks. We no longer need the payment processors, the same payment process that we have today. Eventually, they will probably have their purposes. But right now, we can store value using Bitcoin without any third parties, without any financial institutions. Wallet providers, wallet producers are not financial institutions. They're just creating a product. Most people don't see this. They don't see that Bitcoin is something that you can send and receive on your own. You don't need these third parties. They don't see the value in that. But once you realize how much control the financial system provides to the government over your transactions, over your ability to transact, over your ability to store wealth, you start seeing why it's such a problem to be using dollars instead of Bitcoin. You start seeing the benefits of Bitcoin over dollars. Most people just see Bitcoin as a volatile financial instrument. They don't see any of their benefits. Over the last month, Bitcoin's lost 17% of its value, but that's, of course, because the dollar is constantly being manipulated. There's sometimes more supply of Bitcoin being sold, sometimes more supply being added. If interest rates decrease for the dollar, Bitcoin price will go up. But over the long term, you can see that Bitcoin is up 17,000%. But if we flip this around, if we look at US dollars to Bitcoin, we can see that over the last month, US dollars have appreciated in purchasing power when you compare them to Bitcoin. You can see that they appreciated about 21%. But if you look over the long term, if you flip that chart around from US dollars, from Bitcoin to US dollars, if we flip that chart around, we can see that over the long term, US dollars have lost 99.44% of their purchasing power in terms of Bitcoin. And this is only since 2015. If we go all the way back to 2011, 2009, 2010, when it first started, the loss in purchasing power is infinite. You could buy something like 300 Bitcoin for $1 at one point. Today, it costs something like $60,000 per Bitcoin. And over time, this will continue to increase. We're going to see the purchasing power of the US dollar decrease by 99.4%, then 99.9%, then 99.99%. It'll take some time, but eventually, I think this is where things are trending. Even though the price of Bitcoin decreased by 17%, the amount of Bitcoin that you have has not changed. So if you purchased 0.01 Bitcoin when Bitcoin was all the way at 74,000, you still own 0.01 Bitcoin. It just means that the market, the people who want to buy Bitcoin, maybe their sentiment of Bitcoin has changed. But eventually, I think what's going to happen is that more and more people are going to realize that Bitcoin is the best form of money. It's the best store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. As the market for Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and unit of account grows, we're just going to find better ways to transfer and store Bitcoin. And it'll lead to better layer twos. It'll lead to better payment processors working on Bitcoin. Maybe Visa and MasterCard will eventually start allowing people to have Bitcoin wallets that they can spend from directly. At the end of the day, buying stocks and real estate is a gamble because you're just expecting the value to keep going up forever, even though you have no basis to believe that it always will increase. For example, we don't know that real estate supply won't increase. We don't know that more houses won't be built or how they'll be built. And if suddenly we have 10 times the houses being built extremely quickly, what's going to happen to the properties that you're saving in? People say that Bitcoin is a gamble because the price is very volatile. But for Bitcoin, we know exactly what the supply is. We know that the demand is everybody in the world. And I think that past results shouldn't be used to predict future returns because 10 years in the future, we will have a lot of better technology built on top of Bitcoin. And this will probably outpace everything that we've built over the last 5,000 years, meaning that companies in the S&P 500 will be disrupted. It also means that maybe more real estate is being built. Maybe anybody who's saving in real estate, anybody who's building their wealth in real estate is going to have their wealth transferred to anybody who's saving in Bitcoin because real estate becomes more abundant over time while Bitcoin becomes more scarce. More and more people are buying Bitcoin and they're going to lock it away. They're never going to sell it again. You don't even know if the company that you're investing in, let's say you invest in individual stocks, you have no idea whether that company will be around in 10, 15 years. You don't know if Apple will be around in 10, 15 years. There could be a disruption that changes everything. Maybe we don't need iPhones anymore. Maybe we don't need computers anymore. Maybe something better is built that changes everything. When you look at Bitcoin as sound money, when you look at gold as sound money, gold lasted 5,000 years because no technological change could change it. Bitcoin is very similar to this. So Bitcoin is just one network. It's one record of transactions. As technology improves, as things get better, as quantum computing comes out, we're going to find ways to improve Bitcoin and make it more secure. It's going to be able to do more things, just like the internet. We didn't change the internet. There's no internet 2.0. We're never going to come out with an internet 2.0 to wipe out everything we have before and create something brand new. Similarly, when Bitcoin is widely adopted, we're not going to come out with new cryptocurrencies. We're not going to come out with new technologies. The technology is already there. We just need to build on top of that technology and create new inventions that make lives easier, that solve more problems. I think over the next few decades, we're going to use Bitcoin to build some of the best payment rails in the world because Bitcoin is perfectly designed to be the world reserve asset. At this point, from what I think, just based on the research that I've done, I don't think there is going to be a need for fiat currencies anymore because there will be no need for trusted third parties unless you really want them. There's going to be no need for banks to hold our money for us because Bitcoin can be held on wallets. You can hold it with 12 or 24 words. And this isn't going to be decided by governments. It's going to be decided by the market. It's going to be decided by market participants. So for all we know, Bitcoin could be widely adopted overnight as individuals go out and buy as much as they can, as things go crazy, as inflation around the world increases. Maybe people want to own more and more Bitcoin. And this isn't something that we can change. This isn't something that governments can slow down. The adoption will happen regardless of whether governments like it or not. The only way for governments to even take advantage, to participate, is to own some themselves. Another really big advantage of Bitcoin is that there are no central parties controlling the network. There's nobody to sue, nobody can control the network, and this is completely different from the current financial system. The entire financial system right now pretty much is controlled by the US government because the entire financial system relies on trusted third parties. We rely on custodians to hold our assets for us. We rely on banks to hold our deeds for our houses. We borrow money from banks. We use everything as collateral. The entire system is built on debt, and debt relies on trusted third parties. Because of how the system works, the US government can confiscate wealth without even telling you, no matter where you are in the world. When Russia invaded Ukraine, over $300 billion of Russian assets were seized. And who can prove that this won't happen to anyone else? I'm not trying to make this political, but if another government's country does something that goes against the US government's wishes, then who knows? What if their assets are frozen as well? What if Chinese assets are frozen? What if Japanese assets are frozen? Almost all of your wealth relies on banks to be moved from location to location. So you could be a target of one of these attacks. You could have your assets frozen, never access them again. And if you don't have cash, there are ways to completely shut you out of the financial system because of our reliance on financial institutions. Most people don't see the value of this yet. They don't see how this could possibly make a difference to them because they live in a country where the financial system is relatively stable. But what happens if let's say you own tons of real estate, you own stocks, you own bonds, and all of these rely on trusted third parties. If you want to receive a payment for your real estate, you're very likely going to have to go through a bank. If you want to have your stocks held by a custodian, you're going to have to go through a brokerage. What if you need to leave the country immediately and you need to take your wealth with you? How would you take it with you? Even if you wanted, you can't take more than $10,000 of cash with you on an airplane. You have to declare it and you have to tell someone that you're taking it with you. If you try to take more, you can be accused of a crime. You can't really take your money with you across borders without alerting the authorities, without telling everyone. This is a problem that Bitcoin solves. This is a massive problem that Bitcoin solves because you can take your Bitcoin wherever you want. You can access it from wherever you want. As long as you have internet, you can access it from anywhere in the world using 12 or 24 words. And you can write down these words. You can hold them in a physical wallet. And what this means is that anyone in the world can access their wealth from anywhere else in the world as long as they have internet. If they need to leave their country for whatever reason, this is one of the things that happened to the writer of the Bitcoin Standard. He was from, I believe, Lebanon, and he had to leave the country, and he was only able to take his Bitcoin with him. He wasn't able to take anything else. What Bitcoin does is it takes power away from governments and financial institutions, and it gives that power back to its rightful owners, the people who are actually producing value. They're using their time, their resources to produce value. It's not the governments that should be able to control how we spend our money. We should be able to control how we spend our money on our own. US dollars are the world reserve currency today because the most people in the world use them because they are the most widely accepted. They're the best way to store your hard-earned wealth. They're the most widely used. If you go anywhere in the world, you can spend your dollars. The US dollar becomes more popular because other people use it. In certain countries, they're switching over to US dollars. But eventually, I think we're going to see a switch. We're going to see a flip. We see people producing goods and services using their time and resources to sell them to other people. They spend pretty much their entire lives working. They spend 40 to 60 hours a week just to earn something that someone else, the US government, can just create out of thin air. They can just borrow as much as they want. US dollar Anybody who borrows US dollars, anybody who buys a house can create dollars out of thin air. This is a problem. This is one of the biggest reasons for the wealth gap that we have today. Poor people don't know how money works. The rich people do know how money works. So governments, the rich, take advantage of anybody who's poor because they see this as a way to print as much as they can without the majority of the world, majority of people realizing what's happening, without the majority of the world seeing that their wealth is being stolen from them. This has made it so that a lot of people don't think long term anymore. They think short term because they know that they have to spend their money in the short term. They have to spend their money as soon as possible because eventually it'll be stolen from them. They just expect it. They know that inflation is happening. It's almost normal now to expect that we will deal with inflation over the next coming years, over the coming decades. But Bitcoin changes how we look at money. On a fiat currency standard, you need to find a way to exploit others. So you need to buy as much real estate as you can so that you're not exploited by your government and the financial industry. If you hold dollars, you can expect to be poorer over time no matter what you do. You can't do anything about it. If you hold dollars, if you hold $100,000 in your savings account, next year it'll be worth less. The following year it'll be worth even less. The following year it'll be worth even less. You have to exchange your assets for real estate, stocks, bonds. Otherwise, you'll never be able to retire. On a Bitcoin standard, there's no need to take these risks. You can just hold Bitcoin. You can get your return. You can just keep your Bitcoin in your wallet. Once you've earned your money, you can save it for as long as you want. The value in terms of dollars will fluctuate over time, but eventually we're going to go to a Bitcoin standard where Bitcoin can be exchanged for goods and services. And all of this just works in cycles. So if you're incentivized to save, you can save as long as you want. But if too many people start saving, the price of everything else decreases because there's no Bitcoin on the market. There's no Bitcoin in the economy. As the price of everything else decreases, the value of Bitcoin increases, the purchasing power of Bitcoin increases, and it incentivizes people to spend their Bitcoin and circulate more of what they have. As prices of everything else goes down, anyone who holds Bitcoin is incentivized to give away that Bitcoin, to spend it into the economy, to give it to other people so they can produce more value. They can produce more goods. Instead of using houses as a bank account over time, I think more people will use Bitcoin as their bank account, as their savings tool, as their way of protecting their value for the future. And instead of borrowing against our assets, instead of hoarding houses forever, instead of just buying a house, getting a mortgage to buy that house in the first place, and then using the equity to get second mortgage, third mortgage, fourth mortgage, just keeping on borrowing more and more money. Instead of doing that, we're going to use houses for the purpose that they're meant for. We're going to use them as shelter, and we're not going to use them as a financial tool. This is the purpose of Bitcoin. Bitcoin replaces fiat currencies, so we no longer have to use real estate as an asset. The total market that Bitcoin can disrupt is absolutely massive. Right now, something like 5.5 billion people use the internet, and people are on the internet for a very long time. What this means is that these 5.5 billion people that are using the internet can access Bitcoin as a store of value. On the other hand, there are entire countries that are shut out of the US dollar financial system, and no matter what they do, they can't participate in it. This is a great graphic that I saw on Twitter. The entire market cap of all global assets is almost $900 trillion, and Bitcoin directly competes with every single one of these assets. Since Bitcoin can be accessed from anywhere in the world, anyone can buy even the tiniest amount of Bitcoin and save it for the future, meaning that this huge green rectangle labeled money at the bottom left corner or the bottom right corner there, this entire $120 trillion can be moved from money into Bitcoin. And there's no reason to hold this money anymore because Bitcoin performs the functions of money a lot better. Since Bitcoin's price is determined at the margin and over time more and more people are holding their Bitcoin and they'll never sell again, the price can rise forever. All of these assets, the $115 trillion of equities, $330 trillion of real estate, and $120 trillion of money, a large portion of a lot of this wealth, even bonds right here, a large portion of all of this wealth can move into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can absorb it all. I don't see that being a problem because you can buy Bitcoin for any amount of money. You can buy it for $1, $5, 5 cents, 1 naira, however much you want to buy, you can. There's going to be a point where buyers are going to have to find sellers to sell Bitcoin to them for higher and higher amounts. Buyers are going to be able to buy smaller and smaller amounts of Bitcoin over time because supply is running out and more people are setting Bitcoin aside to spend decades into the future. But what this does is it makes every tiny bit, every Satoshi, more valuable over time, and more money can be absorbed into Bitcoin than any other previously existing economy. The value of one Bitcoin can literally go to billions of dollars because you can buy as little as one Satoshi. So right now you see $900 trillion as the market cap. I think this $900 trillion will be irrelevant. It'll be a rounding error on Bitcoin terms. You can see from this chart here that today, one Satoshi is close to being worth 1 Naira. On November 2015, this is as far as this chart goes back, one Bitcoin was worth 64,369 Naira. So that's about the same as how much it's worth in terms of US dollars today. But today, you can see here 88.5 million Naira per Bitcoin, meaning that we're getting closer and closer to 1 Naira per Satoshi. Eventually, we're going to see 10 Naira per Satoshi, then 100 Naira per Satoshi. This is going to happen with every single currency in the world, including the US dollar. Today, $1 can buy 1,500 Satoshis, but eventually $1 will buy 1 Satoshi. After we get to this level, $10 per Satoshi would happen very quickly because more people want Bitcoin. When you see $1 per Satoshi, people are going to start thinking, I can buy as many Satoshis as I want. I'll buy as many Satoshis as I can. And it's a unit bias. It's people see that number 1 and they want more of it. Right now, people don't see the value there. They see 1 Bitcoin is worth this much. I can only buy a fraction. But in reality, they're buying a fraction of Bitcoin, meaning they could be buying millions of Satoshis. But people don't think of it this way yet, and eventually they will. I also think that on a Bitcoin standard, houses are going to be abundant because we don't need to use them as a store of value anymore. The rich won't need to hold as many houses as they can to store their wealth. Houses won't be a financial tool. Instead, they're going to be used as shelter. After we get to this $1 level, $10 per Satoshi is going to happen really quickly because it's unit bias. More and more people will want 1 Satoshi, 10 Satoshis, 100 Satoshis. As the supply of Bitcoin decreases, people are going to have to pay more per Satoshi. This is another chart that I wanted to show here. You can see here that in terms of US dollars, the S&P 500 has only gone up. It just continues to go up. It's pretty much a straight line. It went from $1,100 per share of the S&P 500 all the way up to $5,500. For Bitcoin, it went from 100 Bitcoin per share of the S&P 500, 100.38, you see there? And it's now all the way down to 0.094771 Bitcoin. So 9 million Satoshis per share of the S&P 500. What this shows you is that demand for Bitcoin is rising a lot faster than demand for the S&P 500. Bitcoin's market cap can double, triple, quadruple overnight. You won't see that with the S&P 500 because most people are already fully invested. Today, because dollars don't work, savers use bonds, real estate, and stocks. And when these savers don't need these assets anymore, they're just buying Bitcoin, the prices are going to drop significantly. Now let's think of this from a different perspective. We'll think of it from the perspective of adopters. I recently went to Jamaica and I noticed that everyone there uses dollars to save, either Jamaican dollars or US dollars. Most people don't have access to stocks. They don't have access to real estate. There are a lot of countries around the world that are in this situation. I spoke to a driver who told us that their cost of living increased by 30 to 40% since the start of the pandemic. He didn't have access to stocks, of course. He didn't have access to prime real estate in the US, of course, meaning that this individual is having all of their purchasing power moved from their bank account to other people who own assets, who own stocks and real estate, and whose wealth keeps increasing in value in proportion to inflation. His purchasing power was dropping as the value of the dollar increases because he was saving in dollars, while everyone else who owns stocks and real estate are getting paid for doing nothing. He was putting in time to take tourists from their resort to the airport, take them around. He was using his time, his labor, his resources, energy, his finite resources, and he was getting back something that is worthless. It can be printed at will. When people go from, let's say, the US or Canada to Jamaica and they take their dollars with them, what they're doing is they're using those dollars that are created out of thin air to buy resources that these countries are producing. They're working hard The people in those countries are working hard to produce those resources. They're basically moving dollars out of the US and Canada and decreasing the impact of inflation on US citizens and Canadians. Since the US government can just print money and send it to other countries, these other countries that are getting these dollars are paying the bill to allow the US government to make its citizens wealthier, to improve its own citizens' lifestyles when the US government is just creating this resource out of thin air and everybody else in the world is accepting it. Why would anyone in the world intentionally choose to be taken advantage of like this? It doesn't really make any sense to me. But in my opinion, once Bitcoin reaches these countries, once Bitcoin reaches countries that use the dollar to save for the future, its adoption is going to skyrocket. During the lockdowns, Americans got $1,200 US for doing nothing, for sitting at home, and they can spend this money while anyone who is actually producing things got this money. They produced something of value and they got back something that was essentially worthless. This is the purpose of Bitcoin. The purpose of Bitcoin is to be the one asset that can be used as money without having to trust central third parties, without having to rely on governments. And since Bitcoin is sound money, it can be used to solve a lot of the economic problems that we have today, because a lot of these problems are caused by fiat currencies. Just like the hundreds of currencies before it, the US dollar will experience hyperinflation. I think the US dollar will be the last currency to fall. I think every currency in the world will eventually fall. I think the US dollar will be the last one to fall, and everything will collapse into Bitcoin. This is going to lead to a wealth transfer from all legacy assets to Bitcoin, and it's going to change the course of the world forever.